breaking into lunch to join us. I think people are still filtering in, but while we just wait for the last few folk to come in, I'd love to hear any immediate thoughts if you saw the film that we showed just as you were finishing up in the last session. Any quick thoughts? Any bits of feedback? Any observations? Did you see it? Were you in that room? Was anybody in that room? Did anybody see it? What thoughts? Brilliant. What was it that spoke to you?
Real people, real situations. Talking honestly and what scares me about food. We all sit here as family members, experts, but we don't actually listen to the people and what they want and what they're worried about.
Yes, yeah, thank you. That's a brilliant segue. So we're going to get started. Oh, go on. Go on.
No, I'm just interested about the videos. It looks like there's a controlled group of people having a discussion and then talking about it. I'd be interested to see, was there actually discussions with people actually out in the kind of real world who were not being prompted or discussed or had
No, I will. I'll talk to you about our methodology because it is really, really important in terms of how we structured it. So the point that you were making earlier, hearing from real people about what we really want from food was the starting point of this whole project. Do come in. It's fine if you want to come in or not. So about 18 months ago, a group of food, farming, green NGO chief execs got together in a darkened room in the middle of darkest Cotswolds. Hi Michael, come and join us. And we were slightly banging our heads together in despair because, probably many of you in this room, we'd been waiting for the publication of the National Food Strategy. We'd all hung a lot of expectations on that National Food Strategy as the moment that government would take food seriously. It had been published, and we'd waited, and it was just ever so gently, but very firmly, kicked into the long grass. And we sat together in this room to say, I'm going to be candid with you, you know that I am. What the hell else are we supposed to do? Henry Dimbleby put masses of effort into an extremely well-researched piece of work, setting out the clear case for change on action on food systems, and put together some really straightforward recommendations that it should be really easy for any government to adopt. And yet, government had declined to respond. And the reason they said that they declined was because consumers don't want that kind of thing. Nobody wants a nanny state. We can't afford this kind of thing in a cost of living crisis. People don't really care about climate and nature. They really only want cheap food. Now, I found this both baffling, but also deeply frustrating and actually offensive. At FFCC, we have invested a great deal of time. In fact, it's one of our ways of operating, if you like, to talk to citizens in places, in communities, in businesses all around the UK about what they really care about, what they want, what matters to them, what they're afraid of. We never hear that stuff. We never hear people saying, we don't want a nanny state. They say, we don't understand why government doesn't help, doesn't act on these issues. So we took on the responsibility at that point, 18 months ago, to ask citizens directly. People are talking on consumers' behalf all of the time. We wanted to know, when you ask citizens, what do we really want from food? And when we show them the kinds of recommendations that eminent people and institutions, not just in the UK but around the world, have been making in the last 5 to 7 years, the recommendations that are both remarkably consistent and yet remarkably absent from policy making, what is it that they don't like? What is it that they perhaps don't want government to do? What might they prefer government to do? And where do we go with all of this? So we set out to design a very high quality participatory process, building on what we already know works really well in citizen dialogues, in citizen assemblies, in other forms of participatory research. It helps that that's my background. So knowing how to put together a strong process in this kind of approach, it worked. So we used a process called sortition, which is the gold standard process for bringing together a proper cross-section of people into the room. And we commissioned 2 excellent expert organisations to run the work for us. And we brought in a range of perspectives, specialists in food systems research. We ran that process over 4 meetings over 3 weeks last summer. And if you like, it was our proof of concept. We wanted to start there to see if we introduce this process to citizens, does it work? Is it a process that really helps citizens tackle the really kind of complex and interconnected issues? And you will have seen from the film, and please do look at all of the assets that we've been producing as a result, that first of all, citizens really do want to be involved in these conversations. They are really interested in food. We all eat food. We all have a stake in food. It is a conversation that everyone can participate in, no matter their background or expertise. And really quickly, citizens start to understand how central food is to so many of the critical issues in front of us. Food and health, food and farming, food and land use, food and climate, food and nature, food and trade, food and justice. And they were not only willing, but really enthusiastic about getting into the really complex questions, the choices, the trade-offs, the really difficult issues that we had been hearing from other folk. People didn't want to deal with those sorts of issues. So that's what we've done. It's part of FFCC's mission and purpose to bring in new, often seldom heard voices to help shape the debate about food and food systems change. But what is really exciting for us, as well as developing the food conversation project, we're going to be doing lots more this year, is how it's brought us into really closer conversation with other businesses, other organisations who are just as concerned about the kind of businesses they are, how they connect with their communities, how they connect with customers, and how we can collectively build that critical mass that brings a more sustainable food system to life as a matter of urgency. So I have got a gorgeous panel, absolutely gorgeous panel with me today of people who I have so much time for, who I find inspiring in the kind of work that they do and how they approach these big, tricky, intractable problems. So we've got Maria from John Lewis Partnership. We've got James, founder and director of, chairman of Cook, the disruptor business. We've got Hannah from BB Partners. And we've got wonderful Charlotte from Ford Hall Farm. I'm such a fangirl of Charlotte. You'll hear more why. We've got a national treasure in John Lewis Partnership. We've got a disruptor business on a high street near you, perhaps. Saved my life when the Arga broke over Christmas, I can tell you. We've got somebody deeply rooted in their community and changing the way they do their business as part of that community. And we've got someone who is expert in telling the stories, telling all of these stories in such a way that brings the hearts and minds of policymakers with us to effect robust long-term change. So I'm going to start with you, Maria. Tell us about how you in your National Treasure business, John Lewis Partnership, are kind of embracing these questions about what it is that your customers want, what matters to them and how you respond.
Thank you, Sue. Thank you for that introduction of National Treasure. I thought you were talking about me. So, in the partnership, and we know that people are more concerned about the state of the world, in any case. But from our research, we know that people expect brands to do the right thing. So they might be relying on government, but actually it's more about, I want this company to do the right thing. And our research shows that 78% of people are more likely to shop with brands that have a good purpose. And when I say good purpose, I mean a meaningful purpose that is also very transparent rather than just a marketing tool to a marketing tagline. What we also know that 62% of people want companies to take a stand on sustainability issues, so environmental, but also fair employment and fair practices, fair social issues. But what isn't surprising actually, that under 30s, they really have an expectation that the businesses will have a stand on a number of challenges that the world is facing today. So we are doing our own research. I mean, just to give you an example, when we asked our customers, when they're buying chicken, what are the most important thing for them that will make them to buy a chicken? So there are 3 things that came. The first one, on top one, is animal welfare. Second one is free range. And the third one is transparency. So British flag or British sauce or just more transparency on sorting. So that isn't surprising. And then when we ask our customers, I'm talking about Waitrose target customers, what is important to them when it comes to environmental and social issues, when it comes to food, very similar things came to mind. It's about protecting nature, it's about health, it's about animal welfare, it's about climate. So and also fair treatment of employees, of staff, and also suppliers. So in the partnership, I mean, we really recognise the challenges of the food system and the impact the food system have on the planet and on health. So therefore we're trying to tackle some of these major challenges. Is how can we grow food and how can we work with our suppliers and our farmers to grow food in a more sustainable way, while obviously helping farmers to transition into the more sustainable food growth. And we know that the food system is causing biodiversity loss and climate change and water pollution, etc., which is why we need to work with our producers, with our farmers, to make sure that we transition in the best way. 25 years ago, we pioneered a supply group with our dairy farmers, but now we have agronomy group, we have a fish supplier forum, we have livestock forum, where we are working very closely with suppliers to understand what are the challenges and how can we actually work together and work very closely. As you know, we also have a Lackford farm. So Lackford Farm is practicing regenerative agriculture. It's our farm in Hampshire. And, we are committed to have that farm in net zero by 2035, but also all of our supplier farmers as well. And what we are currently working with LEAF and with Reading University, because our vision is to make Lackford a centre of excellence for regenerative agriculture and to also inspire and work with our farmers and suppliers of how do we, transition to more sustainable farming. I mean, we are here debating, and Sue, we met on a number of forums. The debate, everyone is talking about it, but I don't feel that a lot has been done. And to us in Waitrose, I think what we are looking at is, we truly fundamentally recognize that in order to protect and secure our future of our business, we simply need to change how we produce. You know, we know it's complex, but that's not an excuse not to do anything. And we need to tackle these challenges one by one. So making small incremental changes rather than trying to go big and at once. And, you know, while, you know, understanding the risks of the transition and how do we share that risk so that the farmers can produce the food but stay in business, essentially. So, as I said, we have really committed and we really want to work with our suppliers and with our farmers to try and overcome some of these complex challenges.
I'm really intrigued by the way you describe the value of small incremental changes rather than being overwhelmed by trying to do everything at once. And we'll come back to that as a strategy for change. But just thinking, James, you kind of did it all at once, didn't you, in setting up a whole new brand. Tell us a bit about that story. What motivated you, and what's still motivating you to keep going?
Well, hi everybody. It's great to be here. So my brother Ed, 27 years ago, set up a business called Cakes and Casseroles and opened a shop in Farnham. And I joined him 25 years ago, and then together we rebranded the business as Cook and involved my sister, and the three of us really have been growing it for the last 25 years together. And kind of when we set it up, I suppose subconsciously we started with why. Why are we doing it? And we were all aligned in sharing the idea that the purpose of business isn't just to maximize profits. Because if you embrace that idea, in my view, you end up seeing natural capital and social capital as inputs to convert into financial capital. And I think that's really what we've seen in the food industry, but actually in every industry. So we sort of went on this journey to try to explore a different idea for business. And, you know, our purpose is to nourish people and planet. People do include shareholders, we're a business, but people also include our employees and the communities in which we trade. And obviously planet includes biodiversity, food systems, and the rest of it. Now, for us, in our journey, we found that idea to be quite countercultural. So we were talking to venture capital, we needed to raise external capital. We didn't because they were like, yeah, but you're profit maximizing, right? And we're like, no, we're not that. They said, well, you know, you don't get it, mate. That's not how it works. So we never were able to take that money, which is why we've grown slightly slower. But I suppose what we did was we designed in a couple of areas to remain independent, one of them being freedom from institutional capital, and the other one being controlling our own route to market. So we never supplied through the supermarkets. And actually, we do supply Lochleven Farm Shop. I was very pleased to see when I Googled it whilst that wonderful lady was speaking. Now, just relating it now to what do people want from food. So we really started this whole question around the purpose of business, actually. And it's only latterly, because we got a bit of a chip on our shoulder about it, we helped launch the B Corporation movement in the UK, which has been a wonderful thing for us, and we've found a lot of friends. But it wasn't food specific. So it's only latterly we've really come to say, and anyway, what about food? I mean, that is after all our industry. And engage much more deeply. You know, we've always had decent sourcing plans, decent, you know, approach to kind of. We've had a net zero commitment for some years now. It's a struggle, but we're now 25% less carbon intensive than we were when we started. But we've got a hell of a long way to go, and we're slightly panicking as to how we're going to get there. But a commitment is a commitment. I suppose my point is, when we've taken a deeper look at the food system, we've realised that it's deeply problematic because we can do a certain amount, and you know, there's not time here, but I happily take anyone through what we're doing and how we're doing it. But the problems I see is twofold. I think the first one is the way we think is problematic, insofar as typically we think about progress versus last year or progress versus what other people are doing. I think they're the wrong benchmarks. We're trying to introduce the benchmark of what's needed, and it's a completely different conversation, and it takes you to a totally different place. And unfortunately, I see a massive misalignment between where people's heads are at, particularly policymakers, and where like actually the citizenry and the public are, who are much further ahead actually than the policymakers. So that's the first point. So that is a massively limiting factor, because of course there isn't such a thing as a free market, particularly not in food, energy, food. You know, these markets are confections. They're made up by policy and subsidies and regulations and all the rest of it. Our regulatory and policy environment is designed to promote cheap food and maximum calories, cheapest cost. And it's a catastrophe. But we can only do so much ourselves as a business in the context of working in a market which is a race to the bottom. So yes to different benchmarks and different mindsets, and there is stuff we can do, and you know, haven't got time to go through that here. But also, yes to changing the rules of the game.
Brilliant, thank you. And a beautifully passionate challenge to so many of the things that we take for granted, the assumptions we make about how the political economy of food actually works. And as we say quite often in the food conversation, when we talk about food systems, we have to start talking about the politics of food and the economics of food, because they are not a given and they can be changed. They're man-made and they can be unmade. I'm going to go into a slightly different take now in the conversation, which is Hannah, who's working with us to tell stories of change and to tell stories in a way that really persuade policymakers that this is a direction of travel and a territory that not only should they engage in, but if they did, they would get a really positive response. Hannah.
Yeah. Hello, everyone. Well, messengers and stories are incredibly important. Some of you have just seen the video produced by the Commission, and the gentleman at the back said, real people, real solutions. And that's a great example of why stories are so important. And we know it because we feel it. So even from this conference, when you go away and you look back at what you remember, it will probably be the stories that are told over kind of the pure data or the specific stats. And a really neat stat that I read was that if you give someone 10 words, so Food, Farming and Countryside Commission is a very good organisation. If you made that into a story, then 93% of people would remember it. But if you just asked people to memorise 10 random words, only 13% would. So the power of stories is very compelling, and we should all be telling more of them. So why is that important? Well, when you go in to talk to your local MP or a policymaker, and you show up with a list of stats and facts, that is going to be 13% effective. So what you want to come away with, or what you want them to remember, is exactly how you made them feel, and that comes through effective storytelling. And the second thing is common ground. So we're all probably aware of the doctors' strikes going on at the moment, and the pay disputes. So if you're a doctor and you're going into that negotiation, you're not going to say, first and foremost, this is the salary I'm on and this is the salary I want. Where you need to start is, of course, the common ground, and that's around patient safety. And the amazing thing about this topic is that there is a common ground, which is that everyone eats, right? That everyone eats and that everyone has a stake in this conversation. So there is an incredible amount of common ground to leverage, and we would always recommend that people start around that common ground when talking with policymakers. And then the third one is who is the messenger and who should be the messenger in this conversation. And that's why this room is so interesting, because you're made up of business owners, farmers, people that actually, you know, got great skin in the game. And it is the time of the kind of authentic voice. It didn't always used to be that way. I remember, for example, in 1997 there was like a huge Cool Britannia movement where it was the kind of era of the celebrity, and all you would want is for David Beckham, for example, to be championing your cause, or such a personality. But there has been a huge shift, and that was mainly enabled by social media, to really want to get into who are the people kind of doing this on the ground, and who are the people experiencing this day to day, and that is the people in this room. So really fully understanding the power of your own voice, finding the common ground, and then being able to tell that story to try to drive change. So yeah, those are my 3 kind of takeaways, Sue, and starters for 10.
Thank you. I'm going to whiz on to Charlotte because I'm trying to use I'll just do this first. Because Charlotte is the storytelling queen of the journey of Ford Hall Farm. Over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Sue, and thank you for that excellent lead in, Hannah, and totally buy into everything that's been said here today. I mean, from the point of the fact that people do care about food and farming, and the fact that stories are key to it. The only reason, thank you, that I'm sat here today is because we told our story, and people cared, and that's why I'm still here today. I'm going to get emotional now. So I'm going to tell you our story in 3 minutes over the last 100 years, okay, of Ford Hall Farm. And essentially my late father was born there in 1915 as a tenant farmer, took over the tenancy when he was 13, when his dad died. Just after the Second World War, turned the farm organic, and it's remained organic ever since. And then our land, which was estate-owned, got sold to a private landowner whose motivation was to profiteer from that land. And initially all was fine until in the 1990s Muller Dairy became our next door neighbour, and our landlord saw the opportunity he'd been waiting for to develop Ford Hall Farm and make his money. But we were there in an old Agricultural Holdings Act tenancy, so we had quite good security. But legal battles then ensued for 10 years after that. So I should say, obviously, you recognise a bit of an age generation here. So me and my brother were from my dad's second marriage after his first wife tragically died. So when I was born, he was 67. When my brother was born, he was 69. So that's what organic life did for us. And, you know, in a farmer's life in general. But what that also meant was that as we were growing up at the farm, coming through the 90s, you know, I was still at school and our family were fighting eviction notice after eviction notice, going through the courts. All the money was going to legal battles, and as a result of that, the farm deteriorated. And that deterioration, because the money was going into legal fees rather than being reinvested, gave the landlord the ammunition he needed to evict us. And finally, in 2003, our family were due to be evicted from Ford Hall Farm, and we're market trading in North Shropshire. But Mullers had waited so long, they suddenly shifted their focus on another piece of land, which gave us an opportunity. So myself then, at the age of 21, my brother at 19, had this opportunity to try and negotiate something with the landowner when he had a derelict farm he couldn't do anything with, and our tenancy was about to end. And 24 hours before we were due to be evicted, we managed to get a new short-term lease for 18 months. We had 11 cows, 6 pigs, 6 sheep, no money, all the roofs had fallen off all the buildings, the house was derelict, and we were like, wow, how cool is this? We've got a farm too! Like you do when you're that age and you think you can do anything. And through those 18 months, we basically had to work out how could we secure the farm long term. My brother just wanted to be a farmer, we're a livestock farm. We're not arable in any sense. He loves his cows, he wanted to carry on doing that. And I was very interested in the community aspect of things and how could we kind of start to rebuild those links. And essentially all we really did from the very beginning was open the farm gate, allow people to get involved, took people's ideas on board, and that's what opened up doors for us along the way. And eventually we set up a community ownership scheme. We managed to negotiate the option to buy the farm from the landowner. We were given 12 months to raise £800,000. We sold £50 non-profit making community shares to over 8,000 people across the country, in fact across the world, that cared enough to keep this farm going. They cared because there was 2 young people wanting to work on the land and they wanted to support that. They cared because they wanted to understand how food and farming works and wants to be connected to it. And our local community were like, do you know what, we want you to be here, we want to be able to visit it, we want our children to be able to visit it, we want to be able to buy food from it that we can trust and we know how it's been reared and produced. But do you know what, we're not farmers, so could you farm it? And my brother was like, yes please, I want to be the farmer. So it was a huge campaign, it gathered a lot of press at the time, and from the 1st of July 2006, Fordham was placed in community ownership and became one of England's first community-owned farms. My brother now has a 99-year lease from the community, so he's changed one landlord that didn't want him to be there for 8,000 landlords that do want him to be there, which is a much nicer place to be. It has succession rights in its tenancy, so he has that incentive to invest in the soil and in the land and be able to pass that down. But equally, the farm is there as a community resource, and my day job is working for the Fordham Community Land Initiative, which is a community benefit society which owns the farm, to utilise it as a community resource, whether it be free public access for the local community to walk around the farm, school visits, we work with adults with learning disabilities, we work with vulnerable young people, we run social prescribing, we also have a cafe, and we run weddings, and we have glamping, and we do events. So we have commercial and social and environmental and conservation aspects to everything that we do. And I think the key thing about what happened at Fordham is it worked despite the system, not because it was supported by the system. It worked because people cared. And we had no idea how it was going to get taken up or whether there was any potential. All we could do was ask for help. And what was amazing was that help came, and that community model came because of the collaboration of all those involved and all the ideas that went into the mix. That went, I think this idea might work. Let's try it. Who knows, will anybody else want to buy a £50 share apart from, the 30 or so people sat in the room? Yes, 8,000 people did, because they wanted that connection and they cared enough. And so our land is not just a breadbasket, it's not just about the soil that we're nurturing, it's not just about the food that's coming from it, but it's about the people and the communities around it as well. And the more that we build those connections and those relationships, we now have a successful farm. We have stability because we have adaptability, and we have resilience as a result of that. And this is in 2006, so 15 years later, we're still going strong. And not only that, on our 128 acres in the summer months, we're employing over 100 local people. So we're supporting the local economy, the environment, and our community, and it all because people cared.
I'm choking, but I'm going to struggle on because we've only got 6 minutes left. So what we've just heard, actually, from 3-4 very different perspectives, is what happens when you talk from a values-led perspective, when you talk explicitly about what it really means to transform a food system, big grand phrase, but in really practical and really down-to-earth ways. As Maria was saying, the small and incremental changes that a national treasure like John Lewis Partnership Waitrose can build into their contracts to help people make the transition. As James was saying, choosing to set up a disruptor business with values at the heart of it, remembering they sell food a bit later. And as Charlotte described really beautifully, what happens when you go out with those stories to the community and how the community responds. Hannah was describing for us there how powerful those stories are and how they speak to our hearts as well as our minds. And in fact, it's that heartfelt desire for change that can embolden our policymakers in the end. But we have got some stats as well, because we've just done a big piece of work with citizens in Birmingham and in Cambridgeshire, for starters, and around the UK, and we're going to be doing a lot more about this. And I thought you might be interested in some of the stats, because we were, weren't we, when we saw them, and our pollsters, more in common, were extremely interested too when they saw the consistency across the responses from people in all parts of the community, identifying on the right or the left politically, all sorts of different educational and social backgrounds, ethnicities, real diversity of responses. They said the consistency of responses was some of the strongest they had ever seen across any topic. And I think they're pretty important for us in terms of how we shape the advocacy that we're all doing about the food system we want in the future. So first of all, citizens almost uniformly want and expect governments and businesses to act. Nobody cares about the nanny state. In fact, one wonderful citizen said, why is it that the only people that talk about nanny state are the people that actually employ nannies to look after their own kids? We would really like government and business to step up and take a bit of responsibility for sorting out the stuff that we just can't. We do not have that power. We do not have those resources. So governments and businesses with the power, with the resources, ought to be doing the work that we cannot do as citizens. 78% think we do need big changes to food in the UK. 77% said that government should aspire to have high standards on health and environment and don't want to sacrifice standards to make food cheaper. 74% want a target for reducing ultra-processed foods in shops and high streets. 79% want fines imposed on food producers that pollute the environment. There is an awful lot of love for farmers amongst citizens. People really value the work that farmers do, and I think they recognise that if farmers weren't farming, at least we'd all be having to garden the heck out of our gardens to survive. They completely get it. 88% of our respondents said it's important that farmers are paid fairly for their work and that government needs to invest in supporting farmers to transition to more sustainable farming. It was a really interesting response about food prices. Citizens were able to disaggregate the discussion about price and affordability from investing in a more sustainable food system for the future. And they were able to differentiate between an economic response that supports people in poverty or people who need additional help from growing the system, as James said earlier, that is currently explicitly designed in a race to the bottom for cheap food in an extractive economy. So with the right information and with the right and time to explore and ponder the issues, citizens completely get the complexities, the challenges, the trade-offs. They want government to act and they want businesses to lead. I'm going to invite you all to make perhaps a final comment before I let you know what we're going to be doing this year, because we're going to be doing lots more of this kind of work through the year. So there've been political folk in the room. We've had ministers, shadow ministers, would-be ministers in the room today. If you were to ask for one big thing that government, let's focus on government for now, that government could do to help shift the system and support the system that citizens are saying they want, what might you ask for? Can I start with you, Hannah, on that one? Because you are good at talking to politicians.
Well, yes, possibly. But you guys will know the detail and the specifics of the policy more than me. But what I would say is that the stat that I always come back to about farming is 71% of land in Britain is run and owned by farmers. And that is an undeniable fact, and it means politicians have to listen to you. And it means politicians have to engage with you. And there's lots of conversation about how can we look at big crises like obesity and health and how does that link into farming, and that's important. But I do think in this election year, this link between farming and climate and land use is the strongest route in to secure attention from the political classes. And the only other thing I would just quickly share is that, yes, it's an election year, yes, it's really important to be focused on that May or that November, but actually building those relationships for the longer term and really thinking about how do we connect with people beyond the next election that will be potentially in government, will leave you in much better stead to make lasting change. So good luck, everyone.
For me, I think it's transparency. And the reason I'm saying transparency is we simply have to make people understand better where the food is coming from and how is it produced. And so my ask would be some sort of labeling, some sort of transparency where the customers don't have to guess. And yes, it's nice to tell stories, but we have to be careful how we tell stories, etc. So as long as that labeling is pretty clear and simple, because we know that customers, even though they spend more time reading labels than they were last year, we know they don't spend much time reading labels. You know, like if you're spending £1 on something, you're not going to really read the label. So that's why we need transparency. Also, from our point of view, I think we need to differentiate, you know, the businesses who care and who actually actively investing, you know, millions of pounds into better food production. We need to be able to have some sort of return on that. And if there's no demand for better produced food, you know, because people don't understand it, because simply it is complex for us that are discussing it, let alone for, you know, just a normal shopper, then that would help. And the other thing I would say, I think it would be really helpful if we can link health to more sustainable food production. I mean, there is some research, but there aren't any links. And I think from our point of view, we need to create demand for food that is affordable, not cheap, because it shouldn't be cheap, affordable, but still produced in a more sustainable way. And, you know, we need that transition. So it would be two things.
James, we're going to have to be super quick. Sorry.
Very quickly, when we started to do this, we made the big mistake of sitting in a room and trying to figure out the answers. And what we learned was it takes a mass mobilisation of everybody in the business to figure out the transformations that are needed. They're granular, they're everywhere, we have to change everything. So my message to government would be, stop taking these problems into the ministry and then serving everyone with your solutions. Start going out there and co-creating the solutions and involving everybody in a mass mobilisation, because it's the only way.
Perfect leading, thank you very much. So we're on a mission now to break down a lot of the barriers we face to make it easier for others. And one thing I'm working on is the campaign for a Community Power Act, which really is, you know, because this is complex, you know, and if we're going to have a bit more of a localised economy, we have to empower our communities in law to be able to take these things forward, be able to shape our places, manage our investment at a local level. So I'm asking government for a Community Power Act to help really empower us to make the right changes in our communities, because everywhere actually needs a bit of a different answer. And that is, well,
Perfect. From the global to the local. What we're about, FFCC's focus this year, is on building an unstoppable movement with citizens at the heart, with citizens centre stage. We're going to be doing lots more of our citizen engagement work throughout the year, all over the UK. We're going to be amplifying citizens' voices for all to see, but we are also going to be working with businesses, national, international, local, so that it's super, super clear to politicians currently in post, looking to be elected, that this is where the prizes are going to be won. Prizes for health, prizes for climate, prizes for nature. This is the work that we need to be doing to create more resilient communities able to face whatever comes. This is about building a movement with citizens at the heart, with citizens' voices at the heart, and with businesses convening behind them, mobilising behind them for the changes that we need. Do keep in touch and find out what we're doing.